What if the Vikings reached Rome at full strength? The year is 860 CE. A fleet of 200 Viking longships enters the Mediterranean Sea. Not raiders, not scattered bands looking for monasteries to plunder. A full military expedition, 15,000 warriors, the most experienced fighters in Europe, and they're sailing straight for Rome. Most people think Vikings were just chaotic raiders who got lucky. They're wrong. When Vikings organized into real armies, they conquered England, carved out kingdoms in France, and built trade networks spanning 3 continents. They were tactically sophisticated, logistically brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. But they never reached Rome. What if they had? If you want to see what happens when Norse military organization collides with Mediterranean fortifications at their respective peaks, hit subscribe now. Because this isn't about mythology or Hollywood. This is about what happens when 2 of history's most effective military systems meet on the battlefield. And the answer might surprise you. Let's clear something up immediately. The popular image of Vikings as wild berserkers charging blindly into battle is mostly fiction. Real Viking military operations were sophisticated and strategic. By the mid-9th century, Vikings had evolved from seasonal raiders into professional military forces. The great heathen army that invaded England in 865 CE numbered between 3,000 to 5,000 warriors and operated as a cohesive, disciplined force for 14 years. They built fortified winter camps, coordinated multi-front campaigns, and employed siege tactics learned from continental warfare. Viking armies used shield walls similar to Saxon and Frankish formations. They incorporated cavalry when operating inland, though they preferred fighting on foot. They understood logistics, maintaining supply lines through river networks and coastal access. Most importantly, they adapted rapidly to local conditions and enemy tactics. When Vikings did raid the Mediterranean, which happened historically but on a small scale, they demonstrated they could operate effectively in unfamiliar waters. In 859 to 862 CE, a Viking fleet led by Haystein and Björn Ironside raided North Africa, southern France, and Italy, even sacking Pisa. But these were small expeditions, perhaps 60 ships with 2,000 to 3,000 men total. Now imagine a full-strength Viking military expedition, not a raid, but a conquest force, reaching Rome in the 9th century. Here's where we need to be clear about which Rome we're discussing. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, but Rome, the city, still existed in 860 CE, and it wasn't defenseless. By the 9th century, Rome is part of the Papal States, under the direct control of Pope Nicholas I. The city's population has collapsed from over 1 million during the empire's height to perhaps 30,000. But it still has defensive advantages. The Aurelian walls, built in the 3rd century CE, remain intact. These walls are 19 kilometers in circumference, 6 meters high, and punctuated by towers every 30 meters. They're designed by the civilization that perfected siege warfare. While not maintained to imperial standards, they're still formidable. Rome has a garrison, though exact numbers are uncertain. Papal forces might number 2,000 to 3,000, supplemented by local militia. The Pope can call on Frankish allies to the north, though response time would be measured in weeks. Crucially, Rome sits inland. The Tiber River is navigable to the coast, but it's a constrained approach. Viking longships, which excel in coastal raids and river navigation, would face geographical challenges reaching the city while maintaining supply lines. A full-strength Viking expedition would approach Rome the same way they approached other major targets. Reconnaissance first, then systematic exploitation of weaknesses. Viking scouts would identify that direct assault on the Aurelian walls is suicidal. These aren't wooden palisades or undefended monasteries. They're stone fortifications designed by military engineers who conquered half the known world. Instead, Vikings would likely employ the strategy they used successfully in England and France. Establish a fortified base on the coast, control the surrounding territory, and strangle the city through siege rather than assault. The coastal town of Ostia, Rome's ancient port 15 miles downstream, becomes the logical target. Vikings seize Ostia, fortify it, and control the Tiber approach to Rome. They raid the surrounding countryside, destroying crops and cutting supply lines. Rome now faces a choice: sally out to meet the Vikings in open battle, or endure a siege. If Roman forces march out to confront the Vikings, the battle would be decided by experience and numbers. Viking warriors in 860 CE are veterans. Many have fought in multiple campaigns across England, Ireland, and Francia. They're equipped with mail armor, steel helmets, iron-rimmed shields, swords, axes, and spears. They fight in disciplined shield walls and understand combined arms tactics. Roman forces, by contrast, are mostly local levies with a core of professional papal guards. They lack the training and cohesion of the legions that conquered Europe 1,000 years earlier. Their equipment varies widely. Their tactical doctrine is outdated. In open battle, 15,000 experienced Viking warriors would likely defeat 3,000 to 5,000 mixed-quality Roman defenders. The Vikings would form their shield wall, weather any missile fire, and then push forward with disciplined aggression. When the Roman line breaks, and it would break, Viking reserves would exploit the gaps. The battle might last a few hours. Roman casualties would be severe. But here's where Viking advantages evaporate. Laying siege to a city protected by the Aurelian walls is a completely different challenge. Vikings historically struggled with siege warfare against stone fortifications. They had some experience from continental campaigns. They eventually learned to build siege equipment and conduct patient blockades. But they lacked the engineering expertise and industrial capacity of Imperial Rome. The Aurelian walls are designed to withstand siege engines. The gates are reinforced. The towers provide overlapping fields of fire. Most importantly, 19 kilometers of wall requires an enormous besieging force to invest completely. 15,000 Vikings cannot surround Rome effectively. They lack the numbers to prevent resupply or sorties. They lack the siege equipment to breach the walls. And they're operating at the extreme end of their supply lines. Every day the siege continues, increases their logistical vulnerability. Meanwhile, Pope Nicholas I has sent envoys north to the Frankish kingdom. Help is coming. When a Frankish relief force of 5,000 to 10,000 warriors arrives, the Vikings are caught between the walls and a fresh enemy army. This is the nightmare scenario for any besieging force. Based on historical parallels, here's what probably happens. The Vikings defeat any Roman force that meets them in the field. They raid extensively through central Italy, accumulating enormous plunder from churches, estates, and towns. Rome itself remains untaken, but the countryside is devastated. Then the Vikings do what they did historically in similar situations. They negotiate. The Pope, desperate to end the destruction, pays an enormous ransom, possibly thousands of pounds of silver, for the Vikings to leave. This isn't defeat for the Vikings. It's their strategic objective. They came for wealth, not to rule Italy. The ransom plus accumulated plunder makes the expedition wildly profitable. The Vikings withdraw to their coastal base, load their longships, and sail home. Rome survives, but bankrupt and traumatized. This mirrors exactly what happened when Vikings besieged Paris in 845 and 885 to 886 CE. They couldn't take the city, but they extracted massive payments to leave. There's a more interesting scenario. What if the Vikings don't just raid, but attempt to establish a permanent base in Italy, similar to what they did in Normandy? If Vikings controlled the Italian coast and demonstrated they could defeat local forces consistently, they might negotiate for land grants in exchange for converting to Christianity and providing military service to the Pope. This actually happened in Normandy. Viking raiders under Rollo became the Dukes of Normandy through exactly this arrangement in 911 CE. A Viking principality in southern Italy in the 9th century would radically alter Mediterranean history. They'd become power brokers between the Papal States, Byzantine Empire, and Islamic powers in Sicily and North Africa. Within 2 generations, they'd be Christianized, Latinized, and indistinguishable from Italian nobles, just as the Normans became French. Could Vikings have conquered Rome? Technically, no. The Aurelian walls were too strong, their numbers too few, and their siege capabilities too limited. Could they have devastated central Italy, defeated Roman armies, and extracted enormous wealth? Absolutely. The real question isn't about capability. It's about objectives. Vikings weren't empire builders in the Roman sense. They were entrepreneurs of violence, seeking profit through the most effective means available. Sacking Rome would be glorious but strategically pointless. Taking a massive ransom, raiding with impunity, and perhaps establishing coastal bases, that's smart business. The Vikings who reached the Mediterranean historically understood this. They took what they could carry and left before they got trapped. A full-strength Viking expedition would do the same thing, just on a larger scale. Rome would survive, but it would pay dearly for that survival. Now I want to hear from you. If you were commanding this Viking expedition, would you besiege Rome and risk everything? Or would you take the ransom and raid elsewhere? And do you think a Viking settlement in Italy could have succeeded like Normandy did? Drop your strategic analysis in the comments. And if this changed how you see Viking military capabilities, share this with someone who still thinks they were just mindless raiders. Because the Vikings who reached Rome weren't mindless. They were calculating.